Good morning. I promised a brief recap of all the discussion yesterday of Kal V'chomers and so on. What it boils down to is the pasuk Moshe Vosechem, right? Lo sevarois b'chol Moshe Vosechem. Don't light a fire on Shabbos anywhere you live. So what does anywhere you live mean? So according to so what the Gemara ends up with is that it's linking that to another pasuk which says "V'chomosh v'seichem," which has to do with basting, right? One second, what's that other pasuk? Um, in regards to executing a murderer, it says "b'chol mosh v'seichem," which indicates it's given over to the courts. Okay, um, clearly that's a matter for the courts. So by using the word "lo svaresh b'chol mosh v'seichem b'yom haShabbos" means that it's talking about the courts giving uh, being prohibited from lighting a fire. When would the courts light a fire? When they execute someone through sreifa, right? So this pasuk wipes out any kal v'chomer that the Gemara tried to advance um, by explicitly saying, no, sorry, no executions on Shabbos. No executions on Shabbos. So that wipes out all the kal v'chomer discussion that we got into. And then we had a coda with Abaye and Rava, in which Rava ends up saying, that you can take a murderer even from the altar. In other words, even from doing the avoda. Um, so that shows um, that executions do override the avoda. So again, regardless of whatever kal v'chomer is, you can logically come up with this pasuk in the Torah says, no, no execute. Yes, go ahead and execute someone, even if it means interrupting the avoda. And that's where we end up. So all the discussion about kal v'chomers and so on is kind of nullified, right? Every proposal the Gemara put forth is is um, is countermanded by these explicit by these psukim, which the Gemara uses to derive those two principles: that executions do not override Shabbos, and that executions do override the avoda. So that's the kernel of it. And today we continue.
Are they using a gezerah shava of misbechotechem? Do they want to use the misbechotechem as a gezerah shava? Because in two pasukim it appears.
Which word? Sorry, Moshe Vosechem or
right? Mamosh v'techem.
Yes, Xera Shava of the sort. Yeah,
I see. So that gezerah shava overrides
any kal v'chomer that you would otherwise come up with. Sure, if the Torah hadn't said explicitly, do this or don't do this, then you could have said, well, I can figure it out. Should I or shouldn't I from a kal v'chomer? But once the Torah gives you an explicit, more or less explicit statement, one way or the other, then that, even if there were a kal v'chomer, would obviously override it.
Mm-hmm. And okay, and we had a discussion about public versus private, right?
Right. So Abaye and Rava, yeah. So the Gemara seems to end up with Rava's view that 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 even if you want to, even if you, regardless of how you view the Kal V'chomer, whether it's talking about Shabbos, which precludes um, voluntary sacrifices, or whether you're talking about Yom Tov, which does not preclude voluntary sacrifices, whichever way you go, you have the pasuk Mei mizbechiti kachen lamus, that executions can override the avoda. So it doesn't matter what you say about, does the avoda override Shabbos or Yom Tov or whatever. It doesn't matter. Like, you can't use a kal v'chomer anyway, because we're ending up saying that the Torah says executions override the avoda. Period. So never mind whatever kal v'chomers you would try to figure out.
So they have override the avoda on Yom Tov and Shabbat, or in any case. whether it's a chol or a chag. Is that what he wants to say? That executions override any avoda on any day.
Yeah.
So then executions could take place on the chag, right?
No, where do you get that?
Oh,
That's precluded by the other by Moshe Vosechem.
but they do override the avoda, right? So the executions.
Right. So the point is that none of the kal v'chomers we advanced really work because we know specifically from the Torah which overrides which. So don't get clever and figure it out one from the other. The Torah tells you. So whatever kal v'chomer you can come up with is moot.
Okay, but so we're saying finally that the executions do override the avoda. So if there would be
Yes.
an avoda to do, the executions override that. There would be
Yes.
executions would take place, but there is a voda on Shabbat and Chag, isn't there?
Right. So executions would not override Shabbos. So yeah. So regardless of whether the avoda is involved, there's no executions on Shabbos
So it would only override a voda on Yemei
on a
Chol,
weekday.
on a Yemei
Yes,
Chol. Okay.
that's right. Okay, let's continue. 36a, about 12 lines down at the two dots. The Mishnah described how the judges sit. They sit in this no, we're getting to that in a minute. That you start with Dina Mamanos, you start with the chief judge, the what is they called in the Supreme Court? The Chief Justice.
Just
Um,
yeah.
and then you go down the line to see everybody else's opinion. Okay, Amarav, which is not the case with Dina Nefashos, as we'll discuss, that you start with the lesser judge and go up to the top. Amarav, Ana Havoy Minyan Devei Rabbi. I was counted among the members of the Rabbi's court. Uminai Didi Havu Matchile Beresha. They always started with me. So he's saying that, like, you know, Rebbe is like he was the most important one. So this kind of contradicts our Mishnah. V'anan maschilin min hagadol tanam, but our Mishnah said you start from the greatest one. Rebbe would have been the greatest one. That's his court, right? He's the chief justice there. Rabba Beredarava Vitema Rav Hillel Beredarav Valos Shani Minyana Deve Rabbi. That court was different. The Chulum Minyanaihu Minatzad Havum Aslay. They always started from the side in that court, and the um, second. Some Rashi in here somewhere. Oh yeah, Mipnei Anava Yisera Shaisavo. So really, they should have started from the greatest one, which was Rabbi. But Rabbi was very humble, and he didn't want to be considered the greatest one, or didn't see himself as the greatest one. So he started from somebody else. But really, the rule still is you start from the greatest one. V'yamar Rav V'yitem Rav Hila Breder Rav Alas, the same speaker. Mimos Moshe Viad Rabbi, from the days of Moshe Rabbeinu until Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, Lomatinu Torah Gdula B'makom Echad. You don't find the greatest Torah authority and the greatest political authority in the same person. Velo, but the Gemara says, well, wait a minute. Have Yeshua. What about Yeshua? Yeshua was the leader of the people, and the Gemara is taking the position that he was the greatest Talmid Chacham. He was, after all, the Talmid Mufak of Moshe Rabbeinu. So the Gemara says, Have Lazar. There was a Lazar there. A Lazar may have been equal or greater to Yehoshua, so it's not necessarily the case that Yehoshua was both the political and rabbinic leader. Vaha have a Pinchas. What about Pinchas? The Gemara is also taking the position that Pinchas ben Elazar was the next leader, and they're also taking the position that he was the greatest Torah scholar. Whereas Zakanim, he may have been a great Torah scholar, but he was equaled by the Zakanim, the other elders. He was one of many, so it wasn't one person again who was both the top in both categories. What about Shaul HaMelech? Hava Shmuel. Okay, in the case of Shaul, he was the king, but in terms of Torah scholarship, there was also Shmuel, his contemporary. Shmuel Navi was greater than him. Vanach Nafshe, but what about after Shmuel died, right? And Shaul was still king. So then wasn't Shaul the greatest in both? Where it says Kul Shane Kamrian, we're talking about his whole career. So he may have been after Shmuel's death, he may have been the king and the greatest Torah scholar, but that wasn't the case. Beforehand, he was king, but not. But Shmuel exceeded him, so we don't count him as someone whose whole career was as the leader and greatest Torah scholar. David, what about David HaMelech? Haba Ira Haya'iri. There was this other fellow, Ira Haya'iri. He was referred to in the Gemara as David's teacher, and so he was greater than David in as a scholar. But didn't Ira die? Same question. Kulu Shnei Kamrinan. We're talking about for the whole career. Bava Shlomo. What about Shlomo Melech? He was the king, and he was also the greatest Torah scholar. Hava Shimi ben Gera. There was Shimi ben Gera, who was also as great or greater than he. Um, Vahakatle, but Shlomo Melech had him executed. Kulu Shnei Kamrinan. We're talking about for Shlomo's whole career. Hava Chizkiah. What about Chizkiah Melech? He was king and also a great Torah scholar. Hava Shavna. There was Shavna Sofer, who was his contemporary and a greater scholar. Vayiktil, but Shavna was killed during while Chizkiah was alive. Kulishnei Amrinan, Kamrinan. We're talking about the whole career. Vahava Ezra. What about Ezra Sofer? Was a political leader and clearly the greatest Talmid Chacham. Hava Nehemiah ben Chachaliah. What about Nehemiah? Which I imagine that the Gemara means that Nehemiah was a political leader equal to or greater than Ezra. So Amar Avada Bar Ava, Afani Omer, Mimos Rebbe. So now we've established for Moshe to Rebbe there was nobody whose whole career was spent as the top political and Torah leader. And now Ravana is saying, I mean, most Rabbi Ad Ravashi, from Rabbi until Ravashi, who was the final editor of the Gemara, Lo Matzino Targdul Makom Echad. Ravashi also had this quality. Well, but wasn't there someone as great as Ravashi? Vava Huna Bar Nasan. Huna Bar Nasan was another. He was another contemporary who had a very high political position. Where it says Huna Bar Nasan Mechaf Avakayf Leila Ravashi. Huna Bar Nasan may have been a great leader, but he considered himself subordinate to Ravashi, and so therefore Ravashi was the guy. Okay, next thing in the Mishnah. Din Nefashos Maschilin
And
Atzad.
what
In
about
case
Rebbe? What do we say? It was
Rebbe,
Rebbe?
we say yeah, Rebbe was
But-
the greatest,
Okay,
was
right.
the top political leader and the top Talmid Chacham.
I just forgot. I got lost. I forgot
Yeah,
about Rebbe.
yeah. So we've identified three people: Moshe Rabbeinu, Rebbe, and Ravashi. Okay. In the case of capital cases, you start from the side, like from the edge of the semicircle. So in other words, from the least of the judges. Minani, where do you get that from? Amar Vachar Bar Papa, Amar Kra, the Torah says, Lo Saneh al Riv. Don't respond to an argument. Lo Taneh al Rav. We read that as don't respond to your teacher, right? In other words, you can't respond once your teacher has expressed his opinion, you can't talk back, as it were. Um, Rabbi Baruch Chana Amar Rabbi Yochanan has another pasuk. Mehacha vayamar David lanashav chigru ish charbo vayachgaru ish charbo vayachgor gam David es charbo. David said to his men, "Everybody, pick up your sword." They all picked up their sword, and then David picked up the sword. It's viewed metaphorically as not as an actual sword, but talking about the sword of execution. In other words, you all rule for, or you all give your opinions first, and then I, David, will give my opinion. That's the source. Amarav, Shonadon Talmido, Vidan Imo Bidin Nefashos. You can teach your students something about Dina Nefashos, about capital cases, and still include them as judges with you. Meisvei, but they asked, Hataros Vatumos, Havuvano, Harav Talmido, Monilem Shnaim. If you have a case of Tumantara, then if you have a father and son on the court, or a teacher and a student, then they're counted as two separate opinions. Dine mamanos, dine nefashos, dine makos. But in the case of civil cases and capital cases, and kiddush hachodesh v'ibur hashana, and having to do with establishing the calendar. If you could have a father and son on the court, but you only count their opinion as one vote. So doesn't that contradict what Rav says? Rav says that Dina Nefashos, you can be a teacher and a student and have two votes. Kikama Rav, Kigon Rav Kana Rav Asi. Rav is only talking about students like Rav Kana and Rav Asi. The Ligmare de Rav Havasriche, the Lisari de Rav Lo Havasriche. They needed their teacher for as a reference, as a source of case law, right? But not for like applying it, right? In terms of applying it, they were independent. They didn't need their teacher to be their Safaria or their place to look up or to know what's the um, black on white letter law, black letter law. But as far as applying it, they were independent.
That's
Okay.
halacha. They had to know. The Gemiri often means halacha, right? Halacha lemaisa.
Yeah, here it means Ligamare means yeah, I guess so. Uh, well, usually Gemire means it's halacha l'Moshe Sinai, right? So in other words, this is the law as it was handed down. Like this is the you know the statute. Okay, now how to apply the statute? If there's a question about that, they were considered independent.
Uh, right. Okay. But yeah, so it does refer more or less to halacha,
I
right?
would say the statute is a good. I mean, halacha, depends how you translate halacha. It means applying the halacha also, like to a case where it's not explicitly, um, uh, you might say it's like Shulchan Aruch, right? Like what's the actual statute is what's being referred to, but not how to apply it. The shelos and shuvos would be the analogy.
So how to apply? Rashi says, "Asi the legemire havu tzrichi
Hmm.
the Rashi shama mirabo," right? And so that it seems to be that the actual or the decision of the ultimately itself, as opposed to it goes. Rashi says, "Aval svire limso rayo reshev hatamim enot tzrichim." That's the svara to under the I guess the reasoning, yeah,
Right.
right.
Right, because look, most cases that come to a court, they're not cut and dry. They're not black and white. There's differing interpretations or different statutes that might apply. Right. That's why it's a living tradition. Right. You have to apply what you know to new cases. Right. So applying what you know, that they need their teachers for, but how to apply it in a new situation or in the situation before the court that they're independent on.
And
Amar Riavo, um, Asar Dvarim Yesh Bein Dine Mamanos Ladine Nefashos. There's 10 differences between monetary cases and capital cases. V'chulan ein noagin b'shar niskal. And none of the things that apply to capital cases apply to shar niskal, an ox that gets stoned. For example, if it's used for avodah zarah. Chutz mi'asrim shlosha, except for the rule of 23 judges, that also applies to a shar niskal. Minani milai. How do you know? Ravacha bar Papa Diamar Kra Lo Sata Mishpat Evyancha Berivo. Don't pervert the judgment of a poor person in his argument, in his fight. Meaning you can't convict a person of a capital crime by a majority of one. Mishpat Evyancha Yatat Mata Avata Mata Mishpat Shel Shor Haniskal. You can. Um, but you can have a single vote majority to execute an ox. So that's an example of how the rules for capital cases generally don't apply to the rule for killing an ox. Okay, so the Gemara says, "Asar, wait, you said there's 10 differences between capital cases and monetary cases. Tisha Havu, go count them in the Mishnah. There's only 9." Um, so the Gemara says, "Hasar Ketani, what are you talking about? There's only 9. Go count them. There's 10. Mishum de'ein hakol ksherin." Um, the what the 10th one is that not everybody is qualified to judge a capital case, meaning a mamzer, for example, is not, someone without proper yichus can't judge a capital case. And that requirement and the requirement for 23 is both based on the same source, as we'll see in a minute. So really, there's only nine distinctions, which have true 10 ramifications. But why does this Rabbi Avo refer to 10? Because there's another kind of person who's excluded from capital cases. The Tanya, Sanhedrin Zakin Vasari Sumisha Labanim. You can't have in the Sanhedrin someone who's very old or someone who is castrated, I think, saris, or someone who has no children. And Rabbi Yehuda Mosif Afach, also someone who's known as a mean or cruel person. V'chilufein b'mesis, but the opposite is true about a mesis, someone who is instigating others to idol worship. Rachman Amar lo sachmo v'lo sachas elav. Don't have pity on that kind of person. On the person who's a mesis, don't have pity. So we allow in that case, people who by inclination or circumstances might be seen to be bitter or cruel.
Where do you bring in the idea of the mamzer? I didn't quite early. You said there was a difference between 9 and 10 regarding a mamzer. I didn't understand that.
Let's look back at the Mishnah for a second.
10 versus 9, and the
1 second. The last statement in the Mishnah was Hakol Ksherin Ladun Dinei Mamanos. Anybody can judge monetary cases. Ve'en Hakol Ksherin Ladun Dinei Nefashos. But there are restrictions when it comes to capital cases. Alakonim Levim Yisraelim Hamasin Lekuhuna. Only people with valid yichus, Konim Levim and Yisraelim, who may marry into the kahuna, into marry the daughter of a kohen. Only those people can judge capital cases. That excludes, for example, a mamzer, right? Who is fully Jewish, but he doesn't have the yichus required to marry anybody he wants.
So that's part of the difference between 10 versus 9.
Yeah, because if you count that, so what the Gemara is saying is that is that's part of the rule of 23. So we'll see what that means. So
Okay.
okay. So now let's discuss that. Hakol Ksher Laduni Mamanos. Everybody, as we just said, can judge monetary cases. Hakol L'Siyamai. What does it mean? Who are we including? I'm a Rav L'Siyamai, including a mamzer. But we've already learned that. Anybody who can, we have a brisa that says, a Mishnah that says, anybody that can judge capital cases, then automatically is allowed to do monetary cases. But there are people who are qualified for monetary cases, but disqualified from capital cases. And they discussed, who does that mean? That means a mamzer, right? So we have another Mishnah that tells us already that a mamzer is precluded from judging capital cases. So what's the Mishnah here adding? So the Gemara says Chada Lasuye Ger. One Mishnah means to include a ger, a convert, Chada Lasuye Mamzer, and one includes in monetary cases a mamzer. So there, in other words, there's another type of person who is fully Jewish but doesn't have the yichus required to be on a capital case court, and that person is a ger. Right, and it has to tell us both. We need both statements. Stricha, diashmin a ger. If the Mishnah only told us about a ger, deroy level akol, we might think that he can marry. He can marry other Jews, right? Maybe of a mamzer, but a mamzer aim alone. Maybe so sure. Tell me a mamzer is okay um, for to be a
Another
judge,
mamzer. He can marry another mamzer.
right? But he can't marry in general. He can't marry generally within the Jewish community. So maybe he is less qualified. V'yesh min mamzer, but if it only told us about a mamzer, then he can be a judge. Deba mitipak shera, because a mamzer, maybe he's restricted in who he can marry, but he was born fully Jewish. He was born presumably from a Jewish father and mother, right? Ger lo ba mitipak shera, but maybe a ger is less qualified because he's not originally Jewish. Maybe not. Sricha so tells us no, not so. Both ger and mamzer are valid judges for monetary cases. And so continuing on about this, but not everybody can be a capital judge. My tama why? And it says that only someone who can marry Kohanim, Levim, and Israeli.
Oh,
Um,
so that's how you exclude the ger, because a ger can't marry a Kohen.
right. My tama, why not? Why are they excluded from capital cases? The Tanya of Yosef, Kashem Shabesin Menukin B'Tzedek, just as a basin has to be completely just. Kach Menukin Mikomum, they have to be completely unblemished, right? Any genealogical issue. Amar Meimar, Micron. What's the proof? Kulak Yafa Rayasi Umumen Bach. The pasuk in Shir Hashirim says, "You are completely beautiful with no blemish at all." V'doma mum mamish. So how do you know that means a genealogical problem? Maybe it means you don't have a physical problem. Amar Vachabar Yaakov Amar Fra V'syasu Shamimach. When referring to the judges appointed by Moshe, um, uh, it says they should stand there with you, Moshe. Imach b'damin lach, meaning they have to be equivalent to you. No genealogical problem. The Doma Hasa Mishum Shchina. Maybe like maybe the judges that were with Moshe, they had to be extra clean, as it were, because they were in the presence of the Shechina with Moshe. So Gemara says, Elam Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak Amar Krav Nasu Itach. It's when Yisro advises them about the judge, he says they shall carry the load with you. Itach bedomin l'cha They have to be just like you, and we're interpreting that as not as a physical blemish, but as a genealogical one. Perhaps, it occurred to me that perhaps why don't we say there? Maybe it means a physical blemish because Moshe had a physical problem. He was kavad peh, right? He had a stutter or something of that nature. Um, so when it says the judges have to be there carrying the load with you, it means they have to be like you, and we're interpreting that as without any genealogical um, problem. Okay, so we'll pick up tomorrow from this Mishnah, from
So
the next
this
Mishnah.
refers to all judges, or just the Dini Nefasho judges, or when he says they have to be with you without blemish?
And Dina Nefashos, yes. Oh, so why? So
Because you could say maybe
why are we applying this to capital cases?
you could say this refers to all judges. You could say it refers to
Hmm.
just Dino Nefashot.
Well, we seem to be applying it only to capital cases. Why? Um,
Let's see. Or is this for the judges?
because we've already seen sources which say that there are qualifications for not everybody, or that hmm, let's see.
Or this refers to the Sanhedrin, or I'm a little confused.
Well,
Which judges?
we're discussing right now the capital cases, which have to be at least 23 judges. Yeah, it's a good question. Why do we apply this to capital cases? Um, well, Moshe's court was definitely charged with capital cases, right? Good question. Um,
I'm just trying to understand which judges we're talking about. With the judges, any judges here, Mishum Shechina, Dilma Ata Mishum Shechina, right? And then it maybe because the Shechina is dwelling with you. And then we say Ela Amar Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak Amar Kra, right? So that
mhm.
seems to be a question, right? Rav, yeah, he
Well,
seems to
we're
rate.
trying to, he's finding, we're trying to find the source for why do you have to have perfect judges, right? Judges with perfect genealogy. And so we tried one pasuk, imach, and then we said, no, that's not necessarily. Maybe that was specifically because they were with the Shechina, but any other, a typical capital case where there's no Shechina involved, um, maybe it would be okay to have a genealogical problem. So we have this other pasuk, v'nasu itach, that the people on your court have to be able to carry with you, which we understand to be as they have to be just as good as you, Moshe.
Right, I understand that. I'm wondering which judges that we're talking about. Does it refer to all members of the Sanhedrin or
Capital cases. You could be on the Sanhedrin and not judge other cases other than capital cases.
right? So
Right.
okay.
As we'll see in the next Mishnah, there is a system of substitutions, of alternates. Right.
Hmm.
If someone's disqualified, then there are alternates.
Right, I remember that from somewhere else that there's someone else that can take in the back row, the row after that, whatever, something.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay. We'll pick it up here tomorrow.
Okay.
Have a good day.